Early morning in Tokyo. At 7:30, the street here is already filling up with youngsters. And where are they going at this hour? To the movies. Long before the theater opens, they've lined up for the preview of a pair of animated films, feature-length cartoons. One of the typical themes of Japanese animated films is science fiction. Another, just as popular, is comedy. Arare-chan, the heroine of this film, is a great favorite. Animated films are, for the most part, based on comic books, called manga in Japanese. Every bookstore in Japan has a comic book section, always crowded with young people browsing through their favorite stories. This is Doraemon, a science fiction character especially popular with younger children. Cartoon characters create an enormous merchandising industry in Japan, for everything from posters to toys to clothes and accessories. Even the fire department uses these characters in their safety campaigns. November 3rd is Culture Day, a national holiday in Japan. Here, the National Railway runs a special Culture Day train for Doraemon fans, with cartoon characters to entertain en route. It takes a special ticket to board, and the young conductors make sure that everybody has one. Naturally, there is concern in Japan about the influence that cartoons have on the children. It's not at all unusual now to find groups of concerned parents formed to discuss the problem. Groups like this one began with an eye to the negative features of comic books, but went on to think about why the children like them so much and how they can be put to constructive use. Children in Japan spend long hours every day at their studies. They turn to the world of cartoons for the kinds of adventures that don't happen in their own lives. Fights and school rivalries, for example, take place a lot less now than they did in the past. The battles have shifted, for the most part, to the comics. Competition in school puts a high premium now on individual effort and success. Cartoons about sports, with their stories of team spirit, mean a great deal to Japanese youngsters. The Doka Ben series follows the adventures of a baseball team with some very odd characters on it. A few of them not very bright or talented. The message is not lost on young Japanese readers. Not everybody has to be a star. It's the team, the combination of people with different personalities, abilities, and even weaknesses that wins out in the end. For all the time that children spend at school, they learn relatively little about jobs and career choices. Here, too, the comics find a useful and surprisingly popular place. This one, for example, is about a youngster who becomes a professional golfer. Not so realistic, perhaps, but a kind of career education introducing a possibility that young readers may not even have known existed. This cartoon is about a boy who wants to become a cook. The lesson here? That people contribute to society by doing whatever they do as well as they can. From the comics, children get a version of the wisdom that they once learned from their elders. A private preparatory school with classes in the evening for students who want to get into a good junior high. A successful career in Japan means cramming for entrance exams, even in elementary school. Cartoons by Mizuki Shigeru feature legends and folk tales and stories of the supernatural. Favorites with children already caught up in demands all too realistic. This science fiction cartoon, too, was tremendously popular for a time with boys and girls alike, with its faraway world so different from their own. The educational possibilities of the comics persuaded this elementary school to let its students form a cartoon club. The teacher in charge of the club has this to say: with today's high-rise housing projects, nuclear families, fewer playgrounds, and so on, the neighborhood isn't much of a social context for children anymore. They have fewer friends, so they make friends with the characters in the comics. We want to deepen those friendships by encouraging the children not just to read, but to draw. The club meets once a week, and the members obviously take their cartoon friends very seriously. But it's not just the children in elementary school who make cartoon friends. Here, an exhibition in the Shinjuku quarter of Tokyo by the cartoon clubs of 6 major universities. On display for 5 days is the work of students at prestigious schools like Keio University and the University of Tokyo. The 6 clubs organized this event to sell and exchange their own magazines with motifs that range from science fiction and historical adventure to political commentary. Until the mid-1950s, comic books were written mainly for younger children. Today, college students are perhaps the biggest audience. There are cartoon magazines of all sorts, published with that age group in mind. A young cartoonist created this series called Already in the Mood for War, about a band of volunteer soldiers and their adventures all over the world. A powerful image of young people in search of identity. Cartoons appeal not only to college students, but to many people in their 30s and 40s, white collar and blue collar alike. Jarinko Chie, a cartoon comedy about a young girl who runs her lazy father's restaurant in the old working class quarter of Osaka. Comic books have become a kind of universal recreation, a work break for Japanese people of all walks of life. Gorogo 13, Assassin for Hire, a cartoon hero in a bi-weekly magazine serial. One week his adventures may take him to the Middle East, the next might pit him against the CIA. Gorogo 13 has been popular now for over 10 years. Comic books are prominently on display in the kiosks at every railway and subway station. The Japanese commuter on his way home is very likely to pick one up with his evening newspaper. Even the serious weekly magazines in Japan, the political and economic reviews, carry a good many pages of cartoons. Newspapers, of course, have comic strips as well. One form of cartoon especially popular is the gekiga, literally picture book drama, a comic about 20 pages long, intended to read like a short story or a serial novel. Typically, picture book dramas are created by teams. A writer provides the story. A cartoonist designs the major figures, the script, and the main points of background. Other members of the team draw the minor characters and fill in the background detail, a kind of assembly line operation. Star of the Giants, a milestone in the history of picture book dramas, first swept Japan as the country emerged from the post-war period into one of high growth and development. Hitetsu is a has-been baseball player who hopes that his son Hyuma will someday pitch for the Tokyo Giants. The dream they share reflects the dreams of many young men in this period to make a career with one of the major business companies. Hyuma is short and slight, but he overcomes his handicap to become a star pitcher in high school. His dream come true, he is drafted by the Giants. Here, the story develops the emotional complications typical of picture book dramas. Coaching the Giants' rival team, the Dragons, is Hyuma's own father. Hitetsu teaches a foreign player how to hit against his son's pitching. Hyuma is knocked for a bases-loaded home run. In despair, he turns to Kawakami, the Giants' manager, who becomes a kind of substitute father. With Kawakami's help and encouragement, Hyuma trains to master himself spiritually. He develops a new pitching style and leads his team to victory. The message? It's not just technique and strength that wins, but spiritual discipline, self-denial, and fighting spirit. The fighting spirit of the team as a family. The Japanese readers, moved to tears by Star of the Giants, were also moved by something else at that time. Japan was beginning to measure itself as a nation against the achievements of the United States. And thus the popularity of another picture book drama, The Lone Wolf. The hero is a samurai who wanders through Japan with his infant son, pitting himself against the power of the establishment. He usually wins with some trick or contrivance, now and then a little ahead of his time. Along the way, he meets and helps a succession of poor people in distress. At the end of every episode, he sets out again on his wanderings. The Lone Wolf was a little like the outlaw hero in American westerns. Something about him appealed especially to the imagination of the Japanese office worker. Mahjong is a sort of national pastime in Japan. Naturally enough, it provides a theme for comics. The reader takes part not just in a game, but in an adventure, and learns a bit of Mahjong know-how at the same time. The comics are a comfort to adults then, just as they are to children, even if on a different level. Sometimes humorously, sometimes violently. They depict the lights and the shadows of the adult world as it is now, and perhaps even influence the shape that world will take tomorrow. There is, of course, a whole world of comics specifically for girls. About 90% of the cartoonists in this world are women, most of them relatively young. This side of Japan's cartoon culture, interestingly enough, is a very prosperous one. At this bookstore, one of today's top cartoonists for girls, Yamagishi Ryoko, is signing autographs. Her fans applied to the bookstore in advance by postcard, and the cards were put in a lottery. Long before the store opened, the lucky winners were lined up outside, everyone with a small gift of some kind for her favorite cartoonist. In the world of girls' cartoons, fans and artists are often the same people. Here, a would-be cartoonist shows an editor some of her work. This magazine, like most, gets dozens of samples in the mail every day from hopeful youngsters. Promising cartoonists, if their work is selected, get a monthly stipend while they learn the professional side of cartooning. The girls who show real talent soon get a partner from the editorial staff to help them develop storylines and improve their styles. Girls' cartoons, like the others we've seen, are reflections of dreams and ambitions, of the search for a way of life. It's a search without confines of time and space. One of the all-time most popular girls' cartoons, The Rose of Versailles, was set in the French Revolution. Here, a cartoon story adaptation of the life of Prince Shotoku, who brought the fruits of Chinese civilization to Japan in the 7th century. The story tells of Shotoku's ambition to unify Japan. It focuses at the same time on the deep sadness of his own life. In the background is the conflict between Buddhism and Shinto, between the native religion and the foreign influence. From China came not only religion, but cuisine, foods like sushi, now considered traditionally Japanese. 10 years ago, a girl's cartoon like this one, with its careful attention to historical and social themes, would never have been published. Young women in Japan today are eager for new and different opportunities to express themselves, to broaden their cultural horizons. Women in greater numbers, for example, are taking extension school courses, seminars, and workshops of all kinds. Cartoons offer modern Japanese women a wider variety of topics, from history to the subconscious. Themes for a more mature audience. Not surprisingly, the number of readers in their 30s and 40s has gone up dramatically. Here, a cartoon story based on the Sacco and Vanzetti trial of the 1920s in the United States. The heroine is a girl from the country who becomes the assistant to a crusading woman newspaper editor. Her part in the story makes her aware for the first time of social and political issues. Cartoons like this one are becoming gradually more popular, even with men. Cartoons, comics, and picture book dramas sell in Japan at the rate of about 47.5 million copies a month. In all their variety, they have a great deal to say about the modern-day Japanese people, their aspirations, their struggles and sorrows, their way of life. Comic books represent some 28% of the whole publishing industry in Japan. Cartoon publishing is a social phenomenon in its own right, where huge companies exist side by side with tiny enterprises. This man, Nagai Katsuichi, has often been called the father of picture book dramas. The small publishing company he runs, more or less by himself, is a kind of focal point for the counterculture in Japan, where many of the anti-establishment cartoonists got their first start. From this one office, Mr. Nagai does everything from editing to photo engraving to distribution. The president of the company, he even lends a hand to load the trucks. Until now, only a few of the most enthusiastic fans have kept anything like cartoon collections. But today, there are plans to establish a number of comic book libraries. It's argued that the cartoons have earned a place of their own in Japanese cultural history and ought to be preserved for the future. In the meanwhile, the enthusiasm of young cartoon fans has produced a boom in comic markets. Cartoon clubs from all over Japan bring the magazines they've produced to these fairs, making friends and exchanging ideas. In a few short years, the markets have turned into happenings, colorful displays of costume from the comics themselves. Popular cartoonist Tezuka Osamu talks about the future of the comics. There's a kind of universal language to cartoons, he says. The way they express emotions, for example. The signs and symbols they use to convey something with one glance. The world is ready for this kind of universal language. Cartoons are the Esperanto of the global village. I believe that cartoons will be an important key to the communications of the future, and I think we have to keep developing in that direction.
Hello, I'm Channel 36, Milwaukee.